Victor Kane was supposed to be an easy target, a retired star with no power, but when gangsters tried to take him down, they had no idea the force they were about to unleash. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime. Story and watch till end. Victor Kane had learned long ago how to disappear in plain sight. Once, his face had been everywhere in America, printed on movie posters, streaming thumbnails, and magazine covers. He was known for playing unstoppable fighters, men who walked away from explosions and defeated entire groups alone. Over time, the audience moved on, and Victor allowed that fading fame to happen. He welcomed it. He left Hollywood quietly and settled into a life that looked ordinary from the outside. He lived in rented homes, drove used cars, and avoided places where attention followed famous names. Most people who passed him on the street had no idea who he was or who he had been. What the public never knew was that Victor's strength did not come from acting. Long before cameras followed him, he had trained his body and mind with extreme discipline. Years of intense physical conditioning, combat training, and survival tactics had shaped him into someone who relied more on instinct than thought. His training was not flashy or public. It was private, controlled, and relentless. Even after leaving films behind, Victor never stopped maintaining those skills. Every morning began with routines meant to keep his body ready, and every night ended with habits designed to sharpen awareness. Victor chose isolation for a reason. His past in the entertainment world had exposed him to people operating in shadows, investors with dangerous connections, and deals that went far beyond film contracts. He had seen how easily money crossed into crime, and how quickly power corrupted those who believed they were untouchable. Over time, Victor distanced himself from those circles, knowing that separation was the only way to stay alive. But separation did not mean escape. Old ties have a way of pulling back, even when years have passed. In several major American cities, a criminal organization had been expanding quietly. Their operations involved money laundering, protection networks, and control over underground markets. During a routine review of old financial records, Victor's name surfaced. To them, he was no longer a person, just a loose end from another era. A former movie star, a man past his prime, someone who looked harmless. They believed he held information connected to people who could expose their operations if questioned. In their world, uncertainty was dangerous, and removing uncertainty was routine. Victor remained unaware of their interest at first. His days were predictable, calm, almost boring. He blended in with neighbors who knew him only as a quiet man with no visitors and no stories. But danger often arrives silently. Changes happen slowly. A car parked too long across the street. Unfamiliar faces appearing in places that once felt safe. Patterns that did not belong. Victor noticed them, not with fear, but with clarity. His instincts recognized what his mind had not yet confirmed. Something had shifted. The past was reaching forward, and someone had decided he no longer belonged in the future. The decision to target Victor Kane did not come from impulse. It was the result of quiet meetings, sealed rooms, and calculations made without emotion. To the criminal network watching him from a distance, Victor represented risk. He had once been close to people who moved money through false companies and hidden accounts. Those connections were old, but in the underworld, time did not erase danger. It only buried it. When Victor's name appeared in archived files, the conclusion was simple. Anything unpredictable had to be removed before it caused damage. The men assigned to study him expected very little. They saw an aging former actor living alone, far from the influence he once held. His daily life seemed almost dull. He shopped at ordinary stores, followed consistent routines, and avoided attention. This normality reinforced their belief that Victor was no threat. To them, he was a symbol of the past, weakened by time and distance from the world that once protected him. Underestimating people was something they had done many times before, and it had rarely failed them. As surveillance continued, assumptions hardened into confidence. The gang noticed Victor had no visible security, no known allies, and no public presence. There were no signs of preparation, no aggressive moves, nothing that suggested resistance. His isolation was interpreted as vulnerability. They did not consider that solitude could also mean control. Every piece of information they gathered pushed them closer to a decision they believed was safe and necessary. Plans began forming around efficiency rather than caution. The idea was not to make noise or attract attention. It was meant to be clean, quick, and forgettable. Victor Kane would disappear, and the past would be sealed again. The gang believed that power came from dominance, from acting first and asking nothing. In their world, strength was loud, violent, and overwhelming. Subtle threats were ignored, and quiet men were dismissed. What they failed to recognize was that Victor's calm was not weakness. It was discipline shaped by years of control. His routines were not habits of comfort, but systems of awareness. His predictable movements were deliberate, designed to make change visible. While the gang believed they were observing without being seen, they were slowly becoming part of a pattern Victor had already started to notice. At the same time, internal pressure within the criminal organization increased. Law enforcement activity in nearby regions made them nervous. Old connections were being questioned, and loose ends felt dangerous. Fear, when mixed with arrogance, leads to mistakes. Instead of slowing down, they accelerated their plans. Acting quickly felt safer than waiting. Removing Victor became urgent, no longer optional. As preparations moved forward, the gang felt certain of the outcome. Their past operations had taught them that people like Victor folded easily when confronted. They expected fear, confusion, and retreat. They expected control. What they did not expect was resistance. They did not expect awareness. And they did not expect that the man they had chosen as a target had already begun preparing for what was coming, long before they believed the game had even started. Victor Kane's awareness did not arrive in a sudden moment. It grew slowly, shaped by small details most people would ignore. Years of training had taught him that danger rarely announces itself. It hides in repetition, in disruptions so minor they seem meaningless to the untrained eye. The same vehicle appearing twice in a week was coincidence. Appearing a third time, at different locations, was something else. Victor began cataloging these changes without emotion, letting instinct guide observation rather than fear. He adjusted nothing at first. Maintaining normal behavior was critical. Panic created patterns, and patterns revealed weakness. Victor continued his routines, but his focus sharpened. He paid attention to reflections in windows, shadows that lingered too long, footsteps that slowed when he slowed. His senses were tuned to the environment, reading movement the way others read words. The presence around him became undeniable, even though its purpose remained unclear. Instead of seeking help or fleeing, Victor turned inward. Preparation did not require weapons or allies. It required readiness. His body had never left the state of maintenance, but now training became precise and intentional. Every movement had purpose. Every exercise focused on speed, balance, and control. He reduced unnecessary activity, conserving energy and minimizing exposure. His living space transformed subtly, not with obvious defenses, but with small changes that created advantage if needed. Victor also studied timing. Whoever was watching him followed predictable schedules. There were gaps, moments when attention drifted. These were noted, not exploited. Knowing when someone expected safety was as important as knowing when danger approached. He mapped these rhythms mentally, building an understanding of how his unseen observers operated. Their confidence became visible through their carelessness. Despite the tension, Victor felt no anger. Emotion clouded judgment, and survival demanded clarity. His past experiences had taught him that confrontations were rarely about strength alone. They were about who reacted first and who controlled fear. Whoever moved out of panic lost. Victor intended to move only when necessary, and only with certainty. The isolation that once felt like escape now became protection. With no close ties, no one else was at risk. No leverage existed against him. This gave Victor freedom to think clearly and act decisively if required. The world had narrowed to a simple equation of awareness and response. At night, Victor replayed scenarios in his mind. Not fantasies, but outcomes. If approached in public, if followed into private spaces, if surrounded. He considered every angle, every limitation, every possibility. He did not hope to avoid confrontation. He accepted it as a likely outcome. Acceptance removed fear, and fear was the one thing he could not afford. By the time the gang finalized their plan, Victor was no longer reacting to a threat. He was synchronized with it. The line between hunter and target had begun to blur. Those watching believed they were in control, unaware that their presence had already triggered a transformation. Victor Kane was no longer simply surviving quietly. He was ready, and readiness was something no amount of planning on their side could erase. The moment finally arrived on an ordinary afternoon, chosen precisely because nothing about it seemed important. The location was an abandoned industrial zone on the edge of the city, a place long forgotten by development and avoided by most people. Cracked concrete, rusted steel, and silent warehouses created an environment where sound traveled strangely and visibility could disappear without warning. To those who planned the operation, it was perfect. To Victor Kane, it was familiar territory that offered both risk and opportunity. Victor recognized the shift in movement before he fully understood it. The spacing of vehicles changed. The rhythm of observation tightened. What had once felt distant and passive became focused and deliberate. He allowed himself to be guided toward the area without resistance, not out of surrender, but control. The absence of witnesses reduced variables, and Victor preferred certainty over chaos. When the approach happened, it was fast but uncoordinated. The men expected hesitation, fear, and confusion. Instead, they encountered precision. Victor moved with efficiency shaped by years of discipline, not performance. His actions were direct and controlled, focused on balance and positioning rather than aggression. Each motion created space, disrupted timing, and forced mistakes. The encounter lasted only moments, but those moments carried weight far beyond their length. The attackers retreated, not defeated by brute force, but shaken by something they did not understand. What they had faced did not match the image they carried. Victor Kane did not fight like a man desperate to survive. He fought like someone who had prepared for this outcome long ago. The absence of hesitation unsettled them more than resistance ever could. Unseen cameras installed nearby later captured fragments of what occurred. The footage revealed a series of movements that appeared calculated rather than chaotic. There was no excess motion, no wasted effort. Each action flowed into the next, creating a sequence that looked almost unreal when reviewed frame by frame. Analysts who later examined the recordings struggled to explain how a retired actor had neutralized trained criminals so efficiently. Victor did not pursue them. Escalation was unnecessary. His goal had never been victory, only clarity. The attempt confirmed what he already suspected. This was not random, and it was not finished. The gang would not accept failure quietly. They would respond with fear, and fear often led to overreaction. As Victor left the area, the weight of the moment settled in. The quiet life he had built was officially over. Avoidance was no longer an option. By defending himself, he had drawn a line that could not be erased, but there was no regret. The alternative would have been submission, and submission would have ended everything. The aftermath of the failed attempt sent ripples through the criminal network. What had been expected to end quietly had instead created uncertainty, and uncertainty was something the organization feared more than attention. Reports returned to the leadership fragmented and uncomfortable. The men involved described the movements that felt deliberate, resistance that came without panic, and a presence that did not fit the profile they had studied. Confidence eroded quickly, replaced by disbelief and anger. The leadership struggled to accept what had happened. Admitting failure meant questioning their own judgment, something they rarely allowed. Instead, they searched for explanations that preserved their sense of control. They blamed poor execution, bad timing, and under-prepared operatives. The idea that Victor Kane himself was the problem felt unacceptable. To them, power was measured by numbers, weapons, and reputation. One man, especially a former actor, should not have disrupted that balance. Yet doubt continued to spread. Surveillance footage reviewed after the incident contradicted their assumptions. Victor's movements were not random or lucky. They showed structure, anticipation, and restraint. He did not attack recklessly or flee blindly. He controlled space, forced errors, and disengaged once his objective was achieved. These observations unsettled those who understood violence well. Skill recognized skill, even when it was inconvenient. Fear transformed strategy. What had begun as a simple removal became a matter of pride and survival. Allowing Victor to remain free meant accepting vulnerability, and vulnerability invited challenge from rivals. The organization could not afford to appear weak. Decisions were rushed, driven by the need to restore authority rather than achieve resolution. This urgency clouded judgment. Resources were reassigned. New personnel were brought in, chosen for aggression rather than subtlety. Planning sessions focused on overwhelming force, believing that quantity would compensate for unpredictability. They convinced themselves that Victor's success had been a fluke, a moment that would not repeat under pressure. Overconfidence returned, reinforced by desperation. Meanwhile, Victor remained silent. He did not seek attention or retaliation. Instead, he observed the change in energy around him. Surveillance intensified. Movements grew clumsier. The precision of earlier observation was replaced by haste. This told Victor everything he needed to know. Fear had entered their ranks, and fear always left a trail. Victor adjusted accordingly. He avoided confrontation, not out of fear, but patience. Each passing day increased the likelihood of mistakes on their side. He understood that the next move would not be cautious. It would be dramatic, designed to erase the humiliation they felt. And dramatic moves exposed people. Unbeknownst to the gang, their accelerated activity did not go unnoticed elsewhere. Increased communication, rushed financial transfers, and sudden coordination across states created patterns that extended beyond Victor alone. Systems designed to hide criminal operations began producing noise. The very effort to eliminate one man was slowly unraveling the protection they had built for years. As tension escalated, the gang believed they were closing in on control. In reality, they were tightening a net around themselves. Victor Kane had become more than a target. He had become a catalyst. And catalysts do not need to act loudly to cause collapse. Sometimes, all they do is wait while others destroy themselves. The gang's next move was planned with meticulous care, or so they believed. They studied Victor's routines even more closely, sending new operatives to blend into his neighborhood, tracking his errands, and analyzing even the smallest variations in his schedule. They constructed a final trap designed to lure him into a location where they could control every exit, every angle, every potential escape. To them, it was foolproof a chance to correct the earlier failure and restore both pride and authority. They did not consider that precision planning often meets unpredictability when a truly skilled mind is involved. Victor had already sensed the escalation. Every shift in movement, every unfamiliar face, and every overcorrection in the gang's behavior told him that a decisive encounter was imminent. He did not panic. Instead, he observed patterns, noting changes in timing, behavior, and coordination. He understood that their confidence, so visible to an outside observer, was masking tension. Fear alters behavior, and Victor knew how to read fear as clearly as he could read open terrain. On the day the trap was set, Victor moved with caution, aware that danger was near, but not yet fully defined. What he did not know was that federal investigators had already been tracking the gang for months. Surveillance, wiretaps, and undercover operations had created a map of the criminal network that stretched across several states. Victor's presence in the trap location, though unintentional, coincided with the authorities' own timeline. The convergence would prove catastrophic for the gang. As the gang activated their plan, entering the location with confidence and the expectation of total control, they triggered the very thing they sought to avoid. Cameras, hidden microphones, and observation posts monitored every movement. The gang did not realize that the patterns of their rushed coordination were now feeding a much larger operation. Each step, each adjustment, each signal intended to manipulate Victor simultaneously exposed their hierarchy, financial connections, and operational methods to law enforcement. Victor, unaware of the full scale of the surveillance, but fully aware of the trap, approached with the same calm precision that had saved him before. He moved slowly, measured each action, and allowed himself to become a visible target without panic or hesitation. The gang, convinced of their advantage, made their presence known, signaling that they expected compliance. The miscalculation was total, the combination of Victor's preparedness and the authorities' covert observation left them vulnerable on multiple fronts. Within hours, the operation collapsed. Arrests were made across multiple cities simultaneously. Leaders who had orchestrated the plan were caught in the act. Mid-level operatives were detained before they could flee. Evidence that would have remained hidden for years was captured in real time. The gang's power, built over decades, crumbled not through Victor's direct action, but because their own attempt to control him exposed everything to outside forces. By the end of the day, Victor Kane was unharmed. He walked away from the location without confrontation, unaware that the trap that had been intended to end him had instead destroyed the very network that sought his demise. The irony was not lost on him. The gang's confidence, based on fear and misjudgment, had triggered their own downfall. The same patience, awareness, and training that had allowed Victor to survive now rendered the gang powerless, and the underworld had been permanently shaken. This event demonstrated a simple, devastating truth. Targeting the wrong person, even with meticulous planning, can undo an entire organization. Victor Kane's presence had been a catalyst, a silent trigger that revealed flaws long buried, and those flaws were now fatal. The underworld learned that day that appearances can deceive, and even the most carefully laid plans are vulnerable to the unforeseen. The arrests sent shockwaves throughout the criminal world. What had started as a single operation against Victor Kane had become a full-scale dismantling of an entire network. Federal investigators moved quickly, capitalizing on the intelligence gathered from the gang's own mistakes. Communications, financial transactions, and hidden assets were traced and frozen. Safe houses were discovered. Leaders who had once seemed untouchable were suddenly in custody, their power reduced to nothing in a matter of hours. The network's influence, built over years of intimidation and secrecy, collapsed like a house of cards. Victor watched the news quietly from a safe distance. He did not celebrate or announce his role. He had no desire for recognition. The operation had proved his point, and that was enough. The world would see the arrests and the downfall of a criminal empire, but the story behind why it happened would remain largely unknown. Victor's involvement was invisible, silent, a truth only whispered among those who knew him. For the man who had trained his body and mind for survival, the lesson was clear. Power could be measured, But wisdom and awareness were far more dangerous than weapons or numbers. As investigators continued to untangle the network, they uncovered more than expected. The gang's ambition had led to overreach, forcing them to act quickly and recklessly. Their desire to eliminate Victor had accelerated exposure. Connections to other criminal enterprises, previously well hidden, were revealed. Evidence of long-running schemes involving money laundering, smuggling, and violent intimidation surfaced. These revelations shocked authorities and criminal circles alike. One man had indirectly caused a chain reaction that no single law enforcement effort could have achieved so efficiently. The gang members who had survived the initial confrontation were left to confront the reality of failure. Fear replaced arrogance. Loyalty fractured as trust in leadership evaporated. Some fled the country, hoping to escape the long reach of the law. Others surrendered, realizing that continued resistance was futile. The once cohesive organization, known for controlling territories through intimidation, had been exposed as fragile, overconfident, and incapable of handling unexpected variables. Victor understood the deeper lesson of the events. The gang had underestimated him, not just because he was a former actor, but because they assumed quiet, solitary people are powerless. In reality, his calm, observation, and preparation were far more potent than the violence they could muster. Their attempt to assert control had done the opposite. It revealed their weaknesses, exposed their methods, and ensured their downfall. Victor's strength was subtle, measured, and precise, but it was enough to undo an empire. In the weeks following the arrests, investigators pieced together the story of how the operation had begun, tracing the events from Victor's observation to the final collapse. Yet even they could not fully grasp the full extent of his awareness, nor the discipline that allowed him to survive and indirectly bring down one of the most powerful gangs in multiple states. His life returned to quiet routines, but the consequences of what had occurred rippled far beyond him. The underworld learned a vital truth. Some individuals are more than they appear, and targeting them can be catastrophic. Victor Kane had demonstrated that patience, knowledge, and preparation could overcome brute force and arrogance. The gang had thought they were hunting a former star, but in reality, they had unleashed a series of events that ended their reign, all without direct confrontation. The lesson lingered. Appearances deceive, and mistakes in judgment can be fatal in a world ruled by power, fear, and secrecy. After the dust settled, Victor Kane vanished from the public eye once again, leaving behind a story that would be whispered in both law enforcement circles and the underworld for years to come. He returned to the quiet life he had always preferred, walking the streets unnoticed, blending seamlessly into neighborhoods where no one recognized his face or his name. The world saw only the collapse of a dangerous criminal organization, but the truth behind it remained invisible, a hidden victory achieved without fanfare or recognition. For Victor, this was exactly how it was meant to be. The gang that had attempted to eliminate him became a cautionary tale. Stories circulated in criminal networks, warning that one miscalculation could destroy entire operations. Their downfall was attributed to arrogance and overconfidence, but insiders knew there was more. The man they had targeted, the one they assumed would be easy to intimidate or eliminate, had been far more than they imagined. He had prepared, observed, and waited. His calm, silent strategy had turned their aggression against them, exposing their weaknesses and ensuring their destruction. Authorities continued to unravel the remaining threads of the network, using the intelligence collected during the failed trap. Safe houses were emptied, illicit funds were seized, and numerous accomplices faced prosecution. The gang's leaders faced long sentences, while mid-level operatives struggled to survive outside the protection of the organization. The collapse was so complete that even rival groups hesitated to fill the vacuum, aware that their predecessors' mistakes had been observed and analyzed by someone far more capable than they realized. Victor's life, however, returned to a deliberate quietness. He did not seek fame or media attention, and he did not attempt to capitalize on what had occurred. His routines resumed, but now with a new layer of awareness. He knew that those who had survived the collapse were still out there, watching and waiting, potentially learning from their mistakes. He continued his physical training, his observation exercises, and his mental preparation, not out of fear, but out of discipline. For Victor, readiness was not optional, it was a way of life. Even though he remained invisible to the public, his story had already begun to ripple through informal channels. Law enforcement officers who had observed his calm and precise handling of danger used it as a case study in tactical awareness. Criminal networks, though unaware of his identity, recognized the danger of underestimating individuals who appear quiet and ordinary. Victor's indirect influence had extended far beyond his immediate survival, shaping the strategies and caution of others without ever needing to act aggressively again. The legend of Victor Kane, though largely unknown to the public, became a silent warning in the underworld. Never assume someone is powerless based on appearances alone. The man who had once starred in films about invincible fighters had proven, in real life, that preparation, intelligence, and composure were far deadlier than brute strength. The gang that had tried to eliminate him had underestimated everything that could not be measured: awareness, skill, and patience. Victor Kane disappeared from headlines, cameras, and gossip columns, but the consequences of his survival lingered. The criminal organization he faced had been erased, its leaders imprisoned, its operations dismantled, and its reputation destroyed. The underworld had learned a lesson that no story in the media could fully explain. Some targets are not what they appear to be, and sometimes legends are far more real than anyone dares to believe. In the silence he returned to, Victor Kane remained a ghost, a quiet force whose story would shock anyone who underestimated him, forever changing the landscape of those who dared to operate in shadows.